Hello my guys, gals and non-binary pals, and welcome to another video from Them Fatales. My name is Alicia, my pronouns are she, they, and in this video we are going to talk about something a bit controversial, a bit messy, shall we say that. That's right, it's the anti-work subreddit controversy. If you are on Reddit, then I'm sure you've seen already, well, let's just get into it, shall we? The subreddit has been gaining lots and lots of attention from the media, which of course means that it had grown quite a lot. Until last week, when it reached around 1.7 million users, and someone from Fox News reached out to the moderator team for an interview. Now, without going into how agreeing to this interview was doomed from the start, the team decided to put forward Doreen, a trans and autistic woman who was not and could have never been prepared for what was going to happen. You see it all the time on YouTube, like Ben Shapiro or anyone else utterly destroys SJW feminists, whatever. Well, this really was an example of that. Doreen was essentially laughed out of the Zoom call, and the backlash was, well, vicious. Now, I'm not going to bother with any notion about whether this backlash was partly fueled by misogyny, transphobia, ableism. It is what it is, and all of that pales in comparison to what the mod team then decided to do next. The subreddit was made private. All the members removed. Screenshots from chats were shared where Doreen showed no remorse or self-awareness about what had happened. It comes out that Doreen has admitted to sexual assault in the past and uses her status as a trans woman and autistic person to defend it. It got bad. It got really bad. And while I'll absolutely 100% condemn everything that has happened and have to wonder how someone like that ended up in the position they were, this video isn't about that. No, this video is about the anti-work movement itself and the dangers of putting too much faith into a social media community to push real change. So, first of all, what is anti-work? Well, the description of the subreddit says, a subreddit for those who want to end work, are curious about ending work, want to get the most out of a work-free life, want more information on anti-work ideas, and want personal help with their own jobs and work-related struggles. And so it's not too surprising that a moderator from this subreddit would go on national television and say something like, laziness is a virtue. Clearly this was set up by a bunch of people who just want to sit around and, sit on their asses, doing nothing, browsing Reddit all day. I mean, that's the image that we have in our minds, right? Well, maybe. I mean, another moderator described themselves as long-term unemployed, and they were just 21. So it definitely sounds like that was some of the motivation behind creating it. But was that why 1.6 million people had joined it? Almost certainly not. Looking at the top post of all time, you can see that a lot of it is about anger over current working culture and increased productivity demands for decreasing pay as cost of living and inflation outstrip wages everywhere. You have workers being chastised for resting with broken bones, being asked to work after family members have died. I mean, coming into Thanksgiving or Christmas after poor staff management with not necessarily holiday pay on it. The fact is that work doesn't pay. The conditions just aren't worth putting up with for what people are getting, and something needs to change. I can maybe make this sound more real and less theoretical by bringing my own experience and how it relates to the issue at hand. I am one of those bizarre and mythical creatures that had a dream job. From very early on, I knew what I wanted to do, and people were surprised by it. I also could afford to think of a job as a dream lifestyle rather than a way to pay for housing and food, because my grandparents, farmers from Italy, in their own words, worked all their lives to provide me with choices. That means that I could aim to work in the music industry, which was my dream. And I could take all the necessary unpaid jobs that were indeed necessary to put my foot in the door. At some point, I actually left a properly paid job to go and work unpaid again, just because the position, duties, and the companies were more aligned with my own aspirations. I absolutely was not aware of the privilege that I had at the time or of the struggles of marginalized groups. I just had a goal in mind and took advantage of every single resource I had available to me to achieve it. Now those resources are gone, I can talk as someone who has both benefited from and has been denied the freedoms of financial security. But one thing, even with all that privilege, was worth noticing. Even reaching for my dream roles at MTV, at Warner Bros. Records, working with artists such as Muse and Madonna, one thing tended to present itself regularly: burnout. My leave days were usually spent every month or so with me and my need to just disconnect from the world for a week straight. I would use my paid leave days to just lock myself in my room, just to not have the pressure of performing. I wasn't sad or mad or anything really while these things happened. I was sort of in standby. I wouldn't answer the phone, I wouldn't go out, not even for food. I called it recharging my batteries, and to me it was a necessity. But why was it a necessity to be away from the job that supposedly I loved doing and I did just for the joy of, like, not even the pay? When I met Raven, some of these disconnecting moments presented themselves too, and she tried to suggest it wasn't quite normal. But at the time, I just dismissed her with the thought that it had worked for me for 30 years of my life. It clearly was how it worked for me. And then, after risking homelessness, things changed. I actually had to find a job to pay rent rather than just for the pleasure of it. I started doing call center work. I even did some consultancy, hoping to actually put to use the experience that I could afford to get into the music and media industry. And these jobs were suddenly extremely more demanding than just doing something I supposedly loved to do and yet had to escape every once in a while, regardless. At 32, I had a nervous breakdown that began with me locked in the bathroom of the place I was doing consultancy at. I hung in there between panic attacks for the whole day, and then finally at 6 p.m. I went home. And after that, I didn't manage to get out of the house again for months. The agoraphobia didn't let me go downstairs to get milk. The medication started just after a few months when I could finally get out and go to the doctor. The year after that, finding myself unable to take and hold a proper job, I started working from home. And that gave me the opportunity to use my skill and interests, be almost a functioning member of society, without having to take breaks to disconnect from the world, because I didn't have the pressure on me every day to perform a public self, to be amongst people on the pavement, on the tube, in the office. That performance for me is the heavy job, interacting with people, never quite understanding their frame of reference, meant I was anxious every day about the possibility of misunderstanding social cues and being punished for it. While going through their own self-discovery, Raven started suggesting I might be neurodivergent. And the more they explained it to me, the more it started to make sense, even though I rejected the idea for a long time before giving in. A regular working environment requires a level of performance, of expected personality that takes most of the energy out of a neurodivergent person, when all that energy could instead go directed to get the job done in a context where our differences are taken into consideration. Unfortunately, as we have seen during the pandemic, we could revert to work from home, most office jobs, but the capitalist culture has evolved little from the idea that whipping someone will extract more value out of them. So we drag people back to the offices with the idea of keeping an eye on them. Otherwise, they might steal paid time from the company. Despite all studies done on the matter show how productivity goes up in a work from home situation. So the back to the office rules have been implemented as soon as they could. Last year, to the detriment of global health and with the consequential impact on the employees' finances for what concerns the cost of commuting, the cost of buying lunch, just to satisfy the capitalist thrill of having physical, exercisable power over others in a context like the office, where you can raise the performance anxiety of people and you can look at their screen from behind them. You can fundamentally take dignity away from them, all in the name of productivity, when in reality the issue has been and always will be having power over another human being. And why does it have to be this way? People on the neurodivergent spectrum show some of the highest unemployment rates of any demographic, with the Office for National Statistics citing that only 16% of autistic people are in full-time employment in the UK. It's not as though neurodivergent people are unskilled or have nothing to offer. In fact, we tend to be incredibly passionate about certain things, with an expertise that can be extremely valuable. So in capitalistic terms then, why aren't we tapping into this extremely valuable resource as a society? Well, the truth is that the current environment of work is barely suitable for neurotypical people, so of course it isn't going to be suitable for neurodivergent people. Late-stage capitalism barely sees workers as people, with full and rich lives, interests, passions. Workers are a resource, and that resource needs to be processed to extract every last drop of productivity from them, just like oil from a seed, instead of planting them to let them grow and flourish. So, how did we get here? If you ask anyone's dad or granddad what work was like for them in the 50s and 60s, especially in America, they'll tell you that they were able to support a family and a mortgage on a single income. And this is something that is repeated through culture. Like in the 80s and 90s, family sitcoms, you will commonly see a family of 4 or 5 living in a relatively large house, often on a single income or with both parents working minimum wage. They might not be rich, but they are certainly much better off than a lot of people today who are forced to live in share apartments without even kids to look after. Definitely no chance to save up for a mortgage. We had to change the age range that defines millennials because their defining feature is not owning a home. And so the average age of homeowners keeps going up. People today are leaving college or university in tons of crippling student debt and then aren't able to find the high-paying jobs to pay it off and make a living for themselves. The reasons for this shift are very complicated, but to simplify as much as possible, you essentially have skyrocketing house prices thanks to homeowners voting regularly against legislation that would build new housing and lower the value of their homes as supply meets demand. And there's also a shift in industry from things like manufacturing to services-based model where the majority of GDP is made on the stock market instead of by business. There's also a reduction in government spending and instead tax cuts to corporations and the rich. and of course the destruction of small businesses by large corporations like Walmart or Amazon that are heralded for creating jobs while the high street actually dies. And these jobs that they create are often incredibly low paid and arduous, with Amazon warehouse employees reportedly urinating into bottles as they aren't able to take bathroom breaks when they need to. Even if people wanted to start at the bottom and work their way up, there are just fewer opportunities to do so, as these large corporations and chains divert wealth into the pockets of shareholders by adopting a strategy of removing competition, absorbing competition altogether, rather than becoming competitive themselves. The jobs that we used to consider as valuable to society and thus publicly funded, such as teachers, doctors, nurses, they are squeezed beyond sustainability through cuts to public spending, and that has a knock-on effect on the quality of life for everyone. While opportunities, such as unpaid internship for skilled jobs in large companies or the media, become increasingly classist, as the cost of living rises, make it impossible for anyone other than those who already have the means to survive to take them. There's a fantastic tweet thread on universal basic income by Mad Laurie that touches on the idea of anti-work pretty well. When discussing universal basic income, inevitably the retort comes, "So you just want people to not have to work, is that it?" Accompanied with a smug smirk, expecting me to backpedal and hem and oh, saying, "Oh no, of course not, that's silly." Except, yes. Yes, I do. People shouldn't have to work. People should want to work. Sharing in the labor of building and maintaining a society because it benefits everyone should be desirable, not forced. It shouldn't be something we do because we'll die otherwise. Imagine a society where survival didn't depend on a job. Imagine how that would alter the fabric of everything. Imagine if you could leave a job without fearing the loss of income or healthcare. Imagine the power of the worker in that society. If a person could survive without a job, imagine what employers would be like. They'd have to treat their workers fairly and make themselves attractive to entice workers. They'd have to offer a better option than other employers and make people want to participate. Places that have offered UBI have seen the result. Most people do want to work. The people who choose not to are generally young parents, students, people with disabilities, and the elderly. People have a desire to contribute, for our lives to have purpose and to be useful. And before you say it, yes, some people will take advantage. That is true for absolutely everything, ever. You think people don't take advantage of the economy we have? Like, say, the 1% who grow wealthier while their employees have to work 3 jobs and use food stamps? They can only do that, by the way, because people are so terrified of losing a job and the destruction that would follow that they tolerate mistreatment, disempowerment, the destruction of their unions, healthcare, retirements, and even their bodies to avoid it. That would not be the case if everyone were guaranteed a baseline survival income. Your boss wouldn't treat you like shit because he knows you can't leave. You can leave, and you will. What if desperation didn't motivate everything? Imagine the impact on health, relationship, parenting, well-being, crime, violence, progress. When you aren't desperately scrabbling for the rent, you can spur a neuron to contemplate long-term problems. Imagine a society where terror of destitution wasn't a constant thrum underneath everyone's existence. Imagine the creative works that society could produce. Imagine the children it could raise, the elderly it could care for. Imagine the inventions it could produce. Now, imagine knowing all this and thinking, no, we can't have all that because someone I don't like might benefit from it. So to avoid that, the rest of you can all hang. And there you have modern conservative thinking. In the aftermath of the interview on Fox, where Doreen Ford was taken to represent the movement of anti-work, something became very clear. We all agree work conditions are unfair, but what to do about it and under which principles and ideas, it's a question with around 1.6 million answers. That seems to be a common issue to movements of the last decade or so, born out of popular need and organized via social media. The lack of a well-defined mission that is spelled out and a plan of action that is agreed upon by participants. This makes me wonder if the disastrous interview was the problem or simply ended up highlighting a problem within the movement, the lack of a clear vision and course of action shared among its members. Take a successful movement like Black Lives Matter. Their mission is clear and therefore actionable. Black Lives Matter is a global organization whose mission is to eradicate white supremacy and build local power to intervene in violence inflicted on Black communities by the state and the vigilantes. The murder of George Floyd by a white police officer launched a national movement to defund or abolish the police, and that is a very tangible mission, to change the nature of policing in the city. Back to anti-work. The issue highlighted by the interview, to me, became, were we ever organized enough to stand a chance? If you look at the comments and sentiments of the users on the subreddit in the aftermath of this controversy, then it's clear to see that they definitely thought so. People felt very strongly about everything that had happened, and there was a deep resentment for what they thought they had lost. But practically, if a collection of 1.6 million people can be undone and disbanded by a single Fox News interview, then maybe it didn't have as much strength as we perceived it to have. Why was that person the one chosen to speak for the whole group? Why didn't that person's views match the views of the group as a whole? Did the group even have any views as a whole? Spending time there before everything went down was honestly quite a mixed bag of anarchists, communists, liberals, conservatives. Everyone was recognizing a similar problem, but they all had different opinions about the causes of those problems and the solutions to them. And this speaks to a bigger problem about social media activism as a whole. And to really get our hands around it, we're gonna have to go back to 2011 in Egypt. The Arab Spring may be one of the most influential events of the 2010s. And yet its implications are so far-reaching and developed so quickly that it actually kind of paled in comparison to everything else. It marked a series of political uprisings and revolutions starting in Tunisia and then spreading through Egypt, Libya, Yemen, Syria and Bahrain, after details of the government corruption were leaked by WikiLeaks. These revolutions were largely organized on social media, which was extremely valuable to the protesters to get messages out as quickly as possible, resulting in many governments trying to shut down their internet or to restrict access to services like Facebook to prevent communication. The year of 2011 in Egypt resulted in an extremely turbulent political climate in which parliaments were dissolved, the military took power, and new leaders were put in place for only a matter of months before having to step down or be removed due to the continued civil unrest and further violent protests. 10 years later, and Egypt is arguably in a worse place than before, with power shifting between the Muslim and the Christian Brotherhood, each imposing their own kind of authoritarianism and human rights at an all-time low. So how did this happen? Well, essentially through a lack of leadership on the side of the protesters. Social media was certainly powerful in facilitating collective activism and organizing to get millions of people in one place. But to do what? With no leader and no mission, there was no single voice for the people to rally around, to present their demands, to put forward a message of change that everyone could agree on. What you end up with is those in power scrabbling to give the people what they want, and with millions of people being there for different reasons, if you please the loudest minority, then you will end up pissing off the rest and causing further unrest. For the individual people involved, they felt power and strength in their numbers. It didn't really matter whether the person next to them wanted the same thing. They were part of a movement, and therefore they all felt emboldened to continue to demand what they wanted. A similar problem arose in the Occupy Wall Street movement of the same year. Everyone who sat in on those protests was there for a similar reason: the corruption of the financial industry that led to the 2008 crash and the failure of the government to hold those responsible to account. Social media was again very useful to organize, to get the message out, and also to build a sense of community. But without a leader and without a clear direction or idea for change, the movement petered out. When protesters were interviewed, they could all agree what the problem was, but nobody had a solution. You can see these trends play out in almost every political movement of the last decade. Brexit was one on social media, with a targeted campaign of advertisement that could play on individual fears and desires that led to victory in the polls, but a complete lack of direction afterwards, as no one really knew what the best way forward to please everyone could possibly be. Even when they did appoint a leader to get Brexit done, it still ended in a complete political mess that pleased no one 6 years after the original movement was formed, artificially. Reddit really exacerbated this, as it is simply a content aggregator. There is no single voice for the people to rally around because voice is democratized on Reddit. Each subscriber has equal opportunity to have their voice heard and contribute to sentiments of the movement, but with varying levels of engagement from the community. Content that looks or sounds good on the face of things, but have very little substance, is very often upvoted to the front page, as many people simply look at something for 5 seconds, give an upvote, move on. While the discussion in the comments will reveal a deeper friction. If you sort by controversial, you'll see that. You also need to please just a few thousand people to make it to the front page of the subreddit, which means that a small minority are those who decide what the 1.6 million will see in their feed. Meanwhile, every person involved will feel empowered by the collective power that 1.6 million people bring to the table, even if their version of what that movement means to them isn't representative of the actual collective. And so you come to the mods. What is the role of a moderator in a community like this? Are they leaders? Well, not really, or at least they shouldn't be, or consider themselves as such. They are rarely major contributors to the content of the subreddit. In fact, what they mostly do is act as caretakers to ensure that the content meets the terms of service of Reddit as a whole. They are facilitators of the content that drives the movement, but are not directly involved in its creation. But they too will feel the illustrious temptation of power that being in charge of 1.6 million people can bring. After all, they created the subreddit with a certain purpose, to be anti-work. It's in the name. It's in the description. And 1.6 million people flocked to it to share their shared experience with how terrible work is. Of course, they are the ones the world outside of the movement will contact, talk to, and use as representatives of the movement as a whole. Or why else would they be there? Well, look at what happened. If you want my opinion, anti-work is about rethinking work. And I'm using the term carefully because, to capitalize on the downtime of anti-work, a subreddit focused on work reform has jumped to almost 500,000 subscribers. The issue is that the idea of reforming work doesn't seem to push away from the capitalist system, just at best to get better treatment for employees under it. I think the potential of anti-work is in the idea that work under a boss is someone exploiting us, and that's what I'm against, not labor for the betterment of people by the people. And that's why I consider the anti-work movement intrinsically tied to things like universal basic income and automation that can provide the foundation for a society that chooses to work and is not coerced by the threat of homelessness and hunger to do so. If you think that the US spends more on keeping people homeless than what it would spend on permanent supportive housing, it should make you wonder if that is not a bug, but a feature of the capitalist American dream, where at this point, wealth has been concentrated in the few hands of the actually 0.1%. They are the ones who are allowed the American dream narrative, and everybody else needs to be threatened by homelessness and hunger to still get work out of, and then to make value for the 0.1% to hoard far beyond what they could ever possibly need, while we are one rent hike away from homelessness. In the immortal words of Michael Jollett, okay, how about this? No more billionaires, none. After you reach 999 million, every red cent goes to schools and healthcare. You get a trophy that says, I won capitalism, and we name a dog park after you. But most importantly, what do you think? Have you ever thought or got close to the anti-work movement? Have you ever been interested in concepts like UBI? Kurzgesagt got an amazing video about it, and actually there currently is a petition for the European Union to actually consider taking on UBI. Actually, I will link it down in the description below. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are, and for anything else, you can subscribe here, you can like, you will find our next video soon, hopefully weekly now. You can check out Patreon if you would like to support us, because as you know, starting off a channel, not the easiest of things. And you can find like scripts there to read it all before it comes out. Those are the options. I hope that this was interesting for you, and I will see you in the next video.